Hello everybody, welcome back to Online BlogCon. Today we are going to discuss site speed optimization. And with us we have Cameron McIntyre. Cameron has been working with IT and has been in this managing websites for the past 7 years. He's been helping individuals like our very own Lisa Lee, as well as other small businesses. Cameron has been working with over 30 corporate companies or websites and web systems, is getting the websites up to speed, working on any, well, I want to say bugs, but bugs isn't the right word, but just caching your website. We just talked about images. Sizing your images correctly, as well as sidebar loading images, your ads loading, and things of that nature. So Cameron is here today to tell us how we can speed up our website using some of the tools that we can get online. I suggest everybody pull up their Google Analytics, go to behavior, and then go under their site speed. That will kind of get you in the right ballpark as far as where you want to be looking and checking out some of this information. All right, so Cameron, thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead.
Thank you for having me. So I'm just going to sort of start here. I'm going to get my presentation up. See if I got the right one. Yeah, that seems to be working. So website optimization, just a quick little bit about me. I'm an undergraduate business student. I'm in my 4th year, so I'm just coming close to the end here. I've been building and managing websites, like you said, for about 7 years now. I have about 1.5 years of job experience as a webmaster in a relatively large corporation, managing 30 of their corporate websites and working with several other clients outside of that role, building and managing their websites as well. And in the last year, I've started offering specialized web hosting on my own platform, helping people to get from the standard basic GoDaddy type hosting to something a little bit more powerful that suits their needs for their growing websites. So in order to think about how websites can slow down, sort of a good starting point is, how do websites load? Where can we get these bottlenecks that will occur? So when you go on your computer, when you go to load a web page, the first thing that your computer is going to do after you type in that domain name is it's going to query a domain name server. That's going to take the information that you've given it, and it's going to turn it into an internet address. So it's going to take google.com, for example, and turn it into the IP address that I'm sure you've seen before, and that tells your computer where the web server is hosted, where it's sort of where the website lives, and how to get the information from your computer to that web server and back. So after that, what's going to happen? So you access the website. Your computer is going to say, all right, take me to that server and get me this website. The server is going to run all the code that is associated with that. It's going to take all your PHP code, all of your MySQL database queries, and it's going to spit out a bunch of HTML that builds and describes the web page as you know it. So everything else in here, this is one really big point. If you have a dynamic website, which is basically any website on the internet today, anything that's run by WordPress, anything that has a database associated with it, it's going to be dynamic. It's going to require this section of time in order to get all that information you need and sort of build your website from that. So after that, your browser is going to read that HTML that it sends to it and download every related and supporting file. So this includes all of your CSS style sheets, your JavaScript, your images, anything that's not the HTML. This is probably the second biggest hang-up for where bottlenecks can occur, because it has to read all of your HTML and figure out every file that needs to be downloaded. They usually all get downloaded from the same server, and once they're downloaded, it takes probably 1 or 2 downloads at a time. So if you have, let's say, 60 JavaScript files and images, it's going to take 60 downloads to get those files. So the 3 major bottlenecks are the server processing time required to take that code and turn it into just plain old HTML, the number of files that you request, how many images, how many style sheets, how many JavaScript files you have, and finally the size of those files. If you have really, really big images, it's going to take you a really long time to download those as compared to more optimized, smaller images. So what can you do to limit these factors? So the one big one is limit the amount of content you have on a page. If you have a page that has a whole bunch of images and a bunch of sidebars and ads and things like that, each one of those is going to require time to download. So every one that you remove is going to help. An important thing here to think about is while one little change might not make a huge impact, every little change will build upon that. So it's a game of numbers. It's how many can you add up to make a bigger change. So following on to that is reduce your image size. If you have an image that's only shown as a thumbnail, there's no point in loading a full size. If you took it on a DSLR or a high quality camera, that image could be 3 or 4 megabytes, when really if it's just a thumbnail, it might only need to be a few hundred kilobytes. So great big scales of difference there in terms of images. You can use page and browser caching and compression. So both of those I'll get to in a minute. I'll start with limiting your on-page content. So like I said, everything on a page takes time to load. If you have a home page that has many, many, many articles, maybe you might want to think about having 3 or 4 full-length articles or 7 to 8 articles that are compressed into short excerpts. That's going to reduce the amount of scrolling that people have to do on your home page, the amount of text that loads, the number of pictures that loads, and all the things like that. Again, with the image size, make your images as small as possible. So the smaller the image, the smaller the file size, and the less that your computer has to download off the server. If you can reuse images where possible, so if you have a logo that appears maybe a couple times on a page, use that same file everywhere. This plays into the browser caching part, but what your browser is going to do is, if it's the same file, it's only going to download it once and show it multiple times. So modern browsers are very efficient at figuring out the best ways to reuse different elements like images. And finally, use an image optimizer. There's lots and lots of free and excellent software out there to optimize your image. For example, for Mac, I use a program called Image Optimizer, and what you do is you simply drag your image onto it, and it gets rid of a lot of the unnecessary data that's included in there. For example, when you have an image, it has a lot of data that in a web application is not important. For example, it's going to tell you maybe what camera took that picture, what shutter settings were used, maybe there's some geolocation information in there. None of that is really necessary if you're just showing a picture on your blog or on your website, and that's all going to add up to, at the end of the day, a sizable difference. So that's if you're very serious about cutting down file sizes on your website, image optimizers are a really, really good one. My track record with them is usually about 3-to-1 file size reduction. So if I have a 900 kilobyte image, it's going to go down to 300 kilobytes, which is a sizable reduction. Even if you don't want to go the route of a full image optimizer, try and make your images as small as possible, back to the first point. On Mac, you can use Preview. There's lots of software available for Windows as well, just to shrink your images to the appropriate size. There's no point in uploading a full 12 megapixel image that's as wide as a sheet of paper if you're not going to use it in a large application. The more you cut it down, the less data has to go between computers, the faster things are going to load.
So I have a question.
Of course.
On WordPress,
yep.
I do shrink it down. My image is down to 600 by 900. That's how wide my my blog is 600. So when I edit my photos, I do shrink them down to 600. But then I also have thumbnails for the preferred image. Can't think of what that's called. Should I also be saving that preferred image in a 200 pixel size and save that as well for those for the preferred image?
For WordPress, I would say you certainly could. It's to me, it wouldn't really be worth the extra effort, especially 200 to 600 pixels is not a huge amount of difference when you're talking about a picture. But WordPress will also do that automatically. In WordPress, when you upload a picture, it will pick, I believe there's 4 sizes. You have small, medium, large, and thumbnail, and it'll automatically crunch that into a better size for you.
Okay, so I'm already doing what I can in that sense then.
Yes. So for WordPress, that's pretty good. That's WordPress has it pretty well figured out, and that's also a setting that you can adjust yourself in your preferences, your site preferences.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the next point, moving on, this is my favorite WordPress plugin. It's called WordPress Super Cache, and it does a whole bunch of stuff. Every one of these things you can do on your own, whether it's WordPress or if it's your own hosted website, things like that. I'm going to focus on WordPress, but just remember that all of these things you can do on your own. WordPress does things such as it'll pre-cache popular pages. So if you have a lot of traffic coming to your site at a particular time, this is a really, really important one. It enables browser caching, which will again speed up your site. Minification will shrink file sizes in a certain way. I'll get to that in a second. It supports content delivery networks, which is sort of the only point that I'll mention that involves other companies or other services. And I'll get to that too. And with all of these, it helps to reduce the amount of load on your server, which in high traffic periods can really help you reduce the amount of downtime you might see. I know a lot of people will get featured on a popular website, and then their website just can't cope with all the traffic, and because of that, they lose out on a number of views or advertising revenue and things of that nature. So page caching provides a static page versus a dynamic page. So a dynamic page, when your browser views this page, the server has to go through it and run all the code, pick out all the information it needs from the database, and it will provide you with the static HTML. So what page caching or pre-caching does is it'll run this once a day, once every 6 hours, once every 15 minutes if you want it to, and it will create these static HTML pages for you. So when a visitor views your site, it already has this information ready to go. It doesn't have to do any amount of processing. When 5 visitors view the page within a minute, they're going to be viewing that same page. Nothing's going to change. So why run that processing 5 times when you can do it once? So this lessens the amount of server processing time. This, again, is very, very important for people that experience large traffic spikes that their servers can't handle. Browser caching is sort of the flip side of that, where the cache is not stored on the server, it's stored on your local computer by your browser. This gives every file a quote-unquote expiry date. So this says when you, as a visitor, download an image from my site, my server will tell you, okay, this image is good until the end of the month. Don't check for it again until the end of the month. And at the end of the month, check and see if there's a newer version, and if not, keep that same one. So what this does is it keeps, let's say you have a logo on the top of your site that doesn't change really ever. This prevents visitors from downloading that logo every time they view. So when they view the next page and the next page and the next page, browsing through your site, they've already downloaded your logo once. They won't have to download it again. This is the third bottleneck that limits the number of files that a viewer has to download off of your server. Minification is an interesting topic. It's sort of like compression, but it works really, really well on text files. As humans, we like to be able to read things. So when we have text files, we will often put them like the before section so that we can read, we know what each line is saying. It's much, much easier to understand. But a computer doesn't care. A computer is just going to read through and find exactly what it needs. So what minification does is it goes through text files like HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and it cuts out all the extra spaces and line breaks and makes it really easy for a computer to read. So this can reduce the file size quite a bit on files like that and help your website run just that little bit faster. The downside to this is if you pre-minify a file, so with WordPress Supercache, what it's going to do is it'll do this on the fly. You don't have to touch anything. But if you're running your own website and you want to minify your CSS files, for example, you have to do this yourself, and you won't. It's much, much harder to make edits afterwards because you have to be able to figure out where exactly you need to edit. Exactly, it's not as human readable. It's much harder to read. Compression is the sort of add-on to minification. Compression works on any type of file, really. It'll compress, for example, your images and anything else that didn't work so well that can't really be minified. So anything that's not text-based. If you have flash animations or things of that nature, this is a setting that is generally turned on from a server level. So what this does is it tells browsers, hey, this server will support compression. I'm going to send you a compressed file, and then the browser has to download less data off of that for the same amount of files. So this one will affect your file size, but it won't affect the number of files that you have to download. So CDN is the content delivery network. So this is there are a lot of companies that offer services for this. Amazon does it, Cloudflare does it. There are quite a few out there. This, if you're running a very geographically diverse site or a site that has a lot of traffic, this is a very good option. It comes at an additional cost, though. You have to pay the company for space on their servers. So what you do is you pay them a monthly fee or an as-you-go fee. You put mostly your static elements, so your things like images, videos, things that can go on to their servers that don't tend to change, and they will disseminate that amongst all the servers that they have around the world. So when the closer you are to a server geographically, the trend is the faster your connection to that server. So what it does is it takes the load off of your server and it puts it on theirs. So when you load your blog, your web server will still serve all the HTML and the PHP and things like that, but the images come from a different server. So you get a sort of dualism of server power there. You don't have to run as powerful of the server, or on the other side, you can keep your server and you get more power to it. So my sort of final thoughts here are that page speed is really important. You can use a lot of different tools to monitor this, things like Google PageSpeed through analytics or webmaster tools. Pingdom has tools. Ookla has tools. Just a search of check my page speed, why is my server loading slow, anything like this will bring up dozens of hits of tools to monitor your performance in this sector. They're going to give you a lot of metrics, things that are going to say you need to do this and X and Y and Z, but it's not important to the point where you should be bending over backwards to change these. A lot of the things that they're going to recommend are going to require almost a rebuild of your site. So if it's going to say, for example, you have blocking elements in your CSS or your JavaScript, you need to change those. That's going to require you to go and manually figure out where each little bit of code needs to go to be the most optimal, and that's not always a feasible option. So do the things you can, but don't look at these suggestions and metrics as the be-all, end-all for that. So that's the sort of presentation I've prepared. If anyone has any questions, this is kind of where I've left it open for that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cameron. You can take your screen share off. So while we were getting going, I think each of us pulled up our Google Analytics to take a look at our site, what Google Analytics recommends. A lot of the stuff you just talked about was way over my head. And so I do, like I said, I do have one on Blogger, and I do have one on WordPress. And I know that a lot of the stuff on Blogger Google already does a lot of things.
Yeah.
So I don't have to, I can't have as many plugins or without knowing all the HTML backend stuff and going in and really modifying the backend. But I'm surprised that my Blogger score for my page was 33 out of 100, and my my Dieter's Downfall on WordPress was 47 out of 100. What do those numbers mean under the summary suggestions summary?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at that for one of my sites here now, and that's sort of what I was trying to get at the end there, that those, in my mind, putting it as a score out of 100 is not a good idea.
Okay.
They rank them into, Google does, should fix, consider fixing, and past. And I think that's a good idea because it gives you an idea of which ones are quite important, which ones will help, and which ones you're already doing. But giving each one a score, in my mind, doesn't help, because between a 45 and a 75, there really might not be much difference. You might have a few little technical things that you've done wrong or that could be bettered, but if you have a really, really powerful server with a really fast connection, that doesn't matter. So someone with a 45 could have faster load times than a 75 on a slower machine or slower server. That answer your question?
Yeah, I don't know. On both of my sites, it says to optimize my images.
Yeah.
So I guess like I said on Dieter's Downfall on WordPress, I do resize all my images to 600 wide. So they are optimized. I thought they're already shrunk, but again, it says, you know, it's telling me to optimize more, and it's telling me that's loosely compressing down for well, it's telling me that the 150 by 150. I'm trying to figure. I think that's the thumbnail. It says loosely compressing 150 by 150 JPEG could save you 73% reduction.
Okay, what's the URL for that page? Let's see if I can get this.
Oh, dietersdownfall.com.
Okay.
I can share my screen too.
So what that's saying is that there's an image that's loaded on your site. All it could be is one image somewhere it's loaded as, for example, 150 pixels wide, but you've used a CSS rule or an HTML rule to make it 119 pixels wide, something that it's not natively sized. So I've just got it loaded here.
Okay. Well, in this case, it's actually, since I did just the home page, it's pulling the sidebar images from my most viewed posts at the moment, the 6 images that it's listing here, and it's all compressed those down as far as I can tell.
Yeah. So that's one of those things that might be a little bit more difficult to change.
Okay.
What WordPress does is when you upload a file, it creates 4 versions for itself. So it does a simple version of image optimizing. So the default for the thumbnail size is 150 pixels. If you have a website that uses different thumbnail sizing, let's say it's 90 pixels, it's going to use that default version and just shrink it a little bit. So it's really close. It's not too different, but Google's going to pick that up as you did something wrong.
Oh, okay.
So what your best bet would be is if the biggest thumbnail size you use on your site for WordPress is 90 pixels, change that in your WordPress media settings so that when you upload pictures in the future, it's only going to show the 90 pixel version. It's going to create a more accurate version for your site. But if you're using 150 pixel versions, that's fine. Leave it the way it is. It's not that much difference.
Okay.
Google's still going to pick it up, but it's not that much difference.
Okay. I know that another person had asked, the site speed, is your server, your GoDaddy, your Bluehost, your DreamHost, your Orange Agent, whatever, are those hosting companies also responsible for your site speed?
Are they? Let me just clarify. When you say responsible, do you mean that you can sort of hold them responsible, or do they have an effect on your site speed?
Does your hosting have an effect?
Yes, big effect. So hosting comes in a million different varieties. The three sort of main ones are the GoDaddy, HostMonster, Bluehost, standard sort of $4 or $5 a month package. What that does is it gives you very economical space on their server for very few server resources. So you're sharing an entire server with typically 1,000 other websites. So if one of those other websites has a lot of traffic or is using a lot of server resources, it's going to slow your website down. It's going to make loading the PHP and pulling information out of the database and downloading your images to make all of those things a little bit slower. And on the opposite end, you have companies that do dedicated hosting. They give you your own web server, you pay a lot of money a month for it, and every resource on that web server is your own. No one else uses it. And that will give you a much, much faster speed on things like that.
Now, I know it's hard for you to provide actual numbers, but a ballpark range. So if you're sharing a server, if you're on one of these $5 a month plans, you're sharing a server with 1,000 people, and you start hitting 1,000 page views a day, 5,000, 10,000. At what point should you start looking for a shared server? Because I can't afford to go all the way, but I can afford to go with the 500, the plan that only has 500 blogs on the server, and then only 100 blogs on the server. At what point, ballpark?
Okay, so there's lots of options in the middle. The kind of two things that I would say are when it starts feeling slow to you, if you're loading pages and you're thinking, wow, this shouldn't be that slow, then obviously that would be a good time for you to upgrade. Or most companies that offer that type of hosting will give you access to a control panel of some sorts, and it will give you reports on on how much server resources, things like CPU time you're using, and whether or not your account has been throttled at all. So if you're using a lot of CPU time, or if you're getting any kind of throttling, that means that they're telling you you're using too many server resources. That's definitely a time to consider upgrading. Okay,
so there is no magical number for upgrading.
No, because you could have a website that you have 1,000 page views a month, and each page is huge. It could be 10 megabytes.
Okay.
Or you could have 10,000 page views of 1 megabyte, and you'd think they would be the same, but they're not going to be the same. So it's more about how you're using the resources that are available to you.
Okay.
So the CPU throttling is probably the biggest advice I could give. Look for that somewhere on your account and see if you're being throttled.
Okay. So Shelly is asking if you have any suggestions for choosing a faster server. How do you go vetting a new provider?
Okay. The age-old axiom of you get what you pay for is so very true with web hosts. The cheap ones are going to give you a bit of space, but that's about all they're going to do. Things you should look for, it seems counterintuitive, but hosts that offer unlimited space and unlimited bandwidth are typically giving that to you at the cost of something else. So if you see a great plan if you're looking specifically only at plans that offer unlimited bandwidth, this was one of the mistakes I made when I was first starting out. I thought, I want to have the comfort of never worrying about running over my bandwidth, and I found that every single offering that was like that gave me trouble. The other things to look for is the host going to give you any sort of performance numbers? At the higher end, for example, on my servers, my host will tell me exactly how much memory and what kind of processor my server has. If they're just going to say, ooh, we have our pro level hosting compared to someone that gives you very specific details, the specific one will probably be a little better.
Okay. So when you're talking bandwidth, can we dummy it down here? Is that the size of the internet tube I just equate it to water, electricity, dummy it down.
Yeah, of course.
That's just the size of the cable.
When they talk, no, that would be your connection speed.
Okay.
So your internet connection is how fast the internet is coming into and going out of your server. Bandwidth refers to every bit of data and information that goes into and out of. So it's like if you have a monthly usage cap on your home internet or your mobile phone, that's what they mean when they refer to as bandwidth. Usually it's a very high number. It's like 1,000. It's 500 gigabytes or 1,000 gigabytes. So that's quite a lot of usage. I've never run into an issue of going over that. But yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, can you use my website as an example since you do my hosting? So, yeah. I never know how much bandwidth I'm using. I'm like, I'm gonna assume I'm okay because I haven't run into any problems. But I think other people could use me as like a template, I guess. So yeah. I mean, in terms of like my traffic, it's not like huge. It's probably around like 1,000 to 2,000, or probably around 2,000 a day. Unique visitors.
Yeah, so that's also going to change with what kind of pages are being viewed. So if you have 2,000 page views of lots and lots of photos, it's going to be more bandwidth. But let me just look exactly. So you said about 2,000 page views a day, you're saying?
Or I think my monthly is like 40,000 uniques.
40,000, okay. So last month, for August, you used 76 gigabytes.
Oh, that's like, okay,
that's
wow.
really not all that much compared to the hundreds that you're going to get from a server provider. They're also going to offer very economical overage fees. They're usually not very much.
Okay.
And that's kind of like like you said, your cell phone service. You have so much data you can download, play your games, do anything, and that's the same thing for a hosting.
Exactly. It's anything that goes on your server that requires an upload or a download. So that's people viewing your server, that's you putting files on your server. All of that is combined into your bandwidth number.
Okay. We have a question. What?
We have a question that was asked a little while ago, and I didn't want to bypass it. It was about the cache plugin. Someone asked, she said she was installing the plugin on Genesis site and had problems with the specified fonts not loading, and basic fonts loaded instead. Do you happen to know if that's like a known issue with that plugin?
I'm not sure. It probably has something to do with the Genesis framework and what the way that it loads fonts. I don't know if it uses the Google font library or if it has its own font library, but it's probably interfering with the loading of that font library. But I couldn't say for certain without looking at it.
Okay. And I actually have one question for you. I have two cache plugins. I just went and looked on my site. Do I need to? I know I have them both downloaded, but one is active and one is not. Do I need to just have one?
If they both do the same thing, you definitely you definitely don't want to have them both going at the same time.
Okay.
In terms of WordPress caching plugins, they probably do the same thing. So
Okay.
just one enough. They'll is the problem. But no.
I do have WordPress, and one of them's like W3 Total Cache, and the other one is the one you suggested, the WP Super Cache.
Yeah. So they're both very good. I like the Super Cache a little bit more.
Okay.
When I was first looking at getting a plugin, Super Cache had updated to the newest version of WordPress, and W3 hadn't. But I'm sure that W3 is also equally as good.
Okay. And one more question about you mentioned static page. Can you explain a little bit more what that is? Because I've seen it on my site, and I'm like, I have no idea what that is. Can you just go a little bit in depth about that for me?
So you have the difference between a dynamic page and a static page is a dynamic page is going to change something based on who views it. So an example being a static page is never, ever going to change until the author changed it. So think websites that were early 2000s, mid 2000s that were purely informational, nothing on them changes. That's what a static page is. A dynamic page has some kind of PHP or other language that is going to make it change based on who views it. So let's say you're on WordPress and you are logged in. You're going to see the login bar at the top. That means that's a dynamic page because it's changed based on who's viewing it.
Okay, thank you. We also had another question about what is the big difference between a JPEG and a PNG?
Okay, they're basically two different image formats. There's not that much difference. The main big difference is PNG supports transparency much, much better. So a PNG, what that's going to do, sorry, let me start again. PNGs support transparency more than JPEGs do. So if you have an image that has any kind of transparency in it, if it has no background, for example, you're going to want to use PNG. But apart from that, there's really not too much difference. If it's a full color, really rich photo that you want to look at, JPEG is your choice. But again, not too much difference there.
Is there a difference in sizing?
Very small, unless you're using transparency. If you're using a transparency, PNG is going to be definitely better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there was another question. What range is considered a good page load time?
Page load time? There's a lot of different studies and a lot of people that claim if your page doesn't load in a second, people will click away. To which I say that's not true. It depends on how engaged your user is. If there's someone who's browsing the net and is like, oh, maybe that's kind of interesting, maybe I'm going to read that, then they're going to have a shorter attention span, and the longer your page takes to load, that's not they're more likely to leave. If there's someone who's really engaged, they're going to wait for your page to load. Doesn't really matter how long. Think about if you're doing online banking and it takes a while to load that page, you have no choice but to wait. So I wouldn't say there's a concrete number. Definitely you'd want to try and keep it under 5 or 6 seconds, but that's, it really depends on how patient people are viewing your site.
So my Google Analytics is telling me my average Page load time for Dieter's downfall is 26 seconds.
So that might be a little high. That could also have been one particular time when it was checking and it said, wow, you have a lot of traffic, and this one page, this one time took a really long time. So that's the kind of the problem with averages, is that you have one outlier and it's not that great.
Yeah, on the 30-day it goes, low, 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 peak, and then it comes, it went up to 138 seconds on one day. Really, it was back on August 26th.
So that was probably a time when either maybe your hosting provider was doing a bit of maintenance and you're a bit slow, maybe your site was under a lot of traffic and it was a bit slow. There's a lot of things that can lead to one random event.
Okay. So you just brought up if your site was down. So if my server goes down, it will totally screw up any of that day, right? That since it can't load.
It depends. If your server is completely down, no one can access anything, then no, it will probably just return an error.
Okay.
But there can be situations where your server will respond to your browser in such a way that your browser thinks that there's a server there that's serving websites, but it doesn't really get any data, in which case it tends to hang. And that's that hanging process that you're seeing there with the 138 seconds. It's not really sure what to do, it's not getting any information back, and then it makes a decision.
All right, so if I change my dates and get rid of that and go back to it drops only to 24 seconds. So it did drop a little bit, but...
So that can also be heavily affected by if you have any advertising networks or things like that running. So your page can fully load and it looks great, and it just takes that little bit longer for the ads to figure out what they're doing. So that's probably where that's coming from. Okay.
And I know in the discussion, I forget if I saw it in the OBC group or if I saw it in a different group, where you could tell your website, and I don't know how, but you can tell it how it wants things to load. If you want to load the post first and then worry about the sidebar and then worry about the ads. I think it was in the SEO group, actually, that that we were talking about last week. It was setting it up so that your site would load appropriately.
Yeah. So that's a feature called lazy load, and that's another really good one if you have if you're using a WordPress theme that supports it and you have a long page like your home page or an archive page. What it does is it doesn't load items on your page until you've scrolled past the point where you would need it. So if you have a page that's 30 articles long, it's not going to load the last 15 articles until you get to the bottom of the page, which prevents people who don't go to the bottom of the page from having to load all that stuff.
Lazy load, and that's a plugin?
It's a feature in jQuery, which is a part of JavaScript. It's not, from what I understand, it's not something you can just turn on or turn off. Your theme has to be sort of built to support it.
I've seen a plugin for lazy load before. I think I've used it before, and then I decided I didn't like it.
I stand corrected.
Well, that's another thing is, getting into WordPress and the number of plugins that you have can slow you down as well. So everybody tries to get under, a magic number. Is there a magic number? Is there, does it matter?
It's the minimum number that you need to run your site effectively.
Okay.
So the thing with WordPress is when you load any page, it's going to load every plugin that you have activated. And even if you only use it on a certain page at one point, it's going to have to decide what to do with that plugin. So if you have 10, 15 plugins, especially old plugins that you don't use at all anymore or that aren't updated, they're going to significantly slow down your site.
Is it enough to leave them deactivated, or you want to completely delete?
Deactivate them is going to be fine for your performance. From a security standpoint, it's definitely good to delete plugins that you don't use or don't need.
Okay.
Just because if a security vulnerability comes up in one of them, it's better to not have it and not use it than to have it and not use it.
Okay. And for the Blogger people out there, since Blogger doesn't have plugins, we use, well, we have to like just import the HTML and put it where it belongs. Is there much that we can do that's comparable to that? I mean, is there...
Because Blogger is such a closed environment in that sense, there's not as much you can do without a good understanding of this HTML and the things that sort of underlie it. You can do a few things in terms of keeping at the very, very top in your head section, keeping all your CSS together and all your JavaScript below that, and that's going to give you a little performance nudge. But apart from understanding what you're putting on in terms of your additions that you're importing and saying, okay, try to use ads only from advertisers that understand performance is important and that have well-optimized ads, there's not as much, no.
Okay. So, I guess in Blogger, since we were talking about image sizes, so if I have an image in my post and I want to copy the web address for that image and then load it on the sidebar as a featured, is it easier to do that and do a resize it in the code, in the HTML coding, do a width equals 250 there, or is it easier to put the image into like a Flickr at a smaller 250 size and have it pull over from Flickr?
It would be easier to just define the size and say width is 250, but it would be better to put a smaller version somewhere else, because that's going to prevent you from loading a really big picture and then sizing it down. It prevents you wasting that additional data on the bigger file.
So do you suggest hosting your photos outside, like on a Flickr account? And
yeah, that doesn't hurt, because it takes that load off of your server. It lets your browser, it downloads them at the same time as your website, because it knows it's coming from somewhere else. So that would certainly help by hosting them somewhere else.
Because that's essentially what Blogger does, right? It hosts it in your Google Plus account, really.
Yeah.
And pulls the image over. So, Lisa, do you do the Flickr thing?
Yeah, I use the Flickr thing, and it also helps me because since I do freelance photography, it helps me be like, look at all the things that I've done. I don't have to re-upload them twice, which is better for my bandwidth in terms of my internet at home because I live alone.
Okay. And Lisa, do you save them at a smaller size, or do you resize them when it pulls it over?
I actually upload them the same. So I think on my Flickr, when I convert them from RAW to JPEG, I already shrink it down to 600 pixels. But then, yeah, so I think everything on Flickr is 600 pixels wide, just because then that way I don't kill my upload bandwidth.
Okay.
In terms of like my data usage.
Okay.
I have a lot of photos.
All right, and then you just do an href to the web to your image, and then you do you don't have to. In this case, you don't have to resize it.
No, but Flickr does resize it for you if you want. So when you take the HTML, there's certain options, like do you want like medium, small, or large, or full size, and then Flickr automatically does that for you.
That's sort of similar to the WordPress feature. When you upload an image to WordPress, it will also do that.
Exactly.
Okay. And Blogger does that too. Blogger shrinks it down to save space on their end as well. I don't resize any of my Blogger pictures. I just leave it whatever and let them, when I upload it to Blogger, let them compress it to their desired.
So that's fine, as long as you're using their sizes and you're using them appropriately, because Blogger's going to pick, I don't know exactly how it works, but I'm assuming if it's anything like WordPress, it's going to pick 3 sizes, a small, a medium, and a large,
Yeah.
and pick the closest one to whatever you want to use it for. So there will be often a gap between what's being used and, the size that it gives you and the size that you're using, but it's a lot smaller than what you originally upload. So that's not bad. Like, that's sort of a compromise in the middle where you're not using a huge file, but it's a lot less work for you.
Yeah.
I do find it compromises the image quality sometimes, because sometimes it'll resize it to a funny way. Especially, I mostly noticed this when I migrated from Blogger to WordPress, that all of my images that were with Blogger were blown up really weird. I think they took like a 300 pixel wide image and blew it up to 600, and so it just looked awful.
Oh. Okay. There's a few more questions. Heidi is asking, she's saying that she uses Cloudflare. Does she need a caching plugin? So she's curious about that.
Yeah, so what Cloudflare is going to do is it's going to serve, it's going to do its own form of caching, probably not as frequent as you might want, and it's going to serve all of your, I'm assuming it's going to serve your images and whatnot as well. If it's a WordPress site and you want to activate the caching, that's a great idea because it'll do a lot of those pre-processing things that I mentioned, and it will reduce the amount of server load you're going to have. So when you have visitors, they're not going to have to process each page on the server. They're just going to download that static page from your cache. So long story short, yes, a caching plugin would be useful for you.
Okay. Looking at the other comments here. Any recommended hosting companies for middle-of-the-road shared servers?
I recommend Cameron.
Yes, I do some hosting. For middle-of-the-road, you can go with Blue. Just my number one suggestion is avoid GoDaddy. GoDaddy, I have never had a good experience with them. And I know this sounds biased or whatever, but just it's for anyone who has to work with your website, it's not easy. GoDaddy is no good. Bluehost, HostMonster, all of those all offer a pro-type upgrade to their shared hosting. That's not a bad deal. It's usually, I'm trying to think, the last time we did it, I think it was about $20 a month, so it is quite a bit more expensive. You can try that out, see what you think. And beyond that, a lot of companies will have a VPS plan. So VPS is Virtual Private Server, and it's the exact midpoint between a shared server and a dedicated server, in the sense that you get a lot of dedicated resources, but you share some things with other people. So middle-of-the-road pricing, you can get very economical VPS plans for $20 to $30 that will do a world of difference over a basic shared plan.
Okay, so you may have just answered this, but when you're looking for a faster server, it does not come down to your bandwidth, and it does not come back down to your space. It's how many other blogs or websites are on that server.
Yeah, it's how many other people are. It's what resources do you have, and who are you sharing those resources with? So the things you want to look for are memory and processor speed usually. So a server with more memory is going to help you out. It's going to make things faster and let you run more things at the same time. So if you're sharing with more people, lots of memory is very important. If you want pure speed, you want a faster processor that you can process each of your requests and all the PHP and database requests. It's going to be able to process those faster. So those are the kind of two important things, not bandwidth, CPU and memory.
Okay.
Okay,
And,
can I? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have two questions about load time. Let's see. The first one, she said, I'm looking over my overview on Google Analytics, and I have a few super high spikes, like 39 seconds, 69 seconds. I think I might have missed maybe what you had said could possibly cause these types of spikes.
So yeah, that could be things like especially if you're on a shared server, if someone else on your server is having a really high traffic spike, which is slowing your site down. It could be your server was slowing down for some maintenance from your provider, or for whatever reason, Google has had a hard time accessing that page, and it's hanging. So it's taking a little while to figure out what's going on, and then it's deciding what to do. So if there's only a couple of outliers, it's probably not a big deal. You want to look at the trend of what's happening.
Okay, and I think the final question is it normal to have an average load time on some days of 0 seconds?
That could be, I've never seen that, could be the way that Google is crawling your site. So when I say crawling, Google checks pages throughout the internet every period. Sometimes, if you're a popular site, it's every day, or it could be every week or every month. Actually, every month is pretty low. Probably at least once a week. Could just be that it doesn't have any data on Sundays because it's never checked you on Sunday. Apart from that, though, I'm not too sure.
Okay.
I have one last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. So, again, going back to Google Analytics, to my site speed overview.
Yep.
The average load time, like I said, is kind of high, nearly 25 seconds. But then it also gives a redirect time, domain lookup time, connection time, response time, and download time. All of the rest of those are under 1 second. So if I am reading this correctly, my server is good. My pipeline to my server, I guess, is lack of a better word. That's good, right? Everything to and from the server is under a second.
Yeah. So each one of those is kind of one of the steps. So your redirect time is if you're, let's say you have a redirect on your main page, so it takes you from google.com to actually google.com/search. That's going to be your redirect time, how long to figure out that. Your domain lookup is how much time it takes to translate google.com into a series of numbers. Your connection time is how long it takes to, once you've put in those numbers, how long to figure out where the server is, how to get the data back and forth. And then your response time, how long it takes to get back to you. And your download time is the amount of time it's taking to download that page. For you specifically, where these higher times are coming from is likely your ad network. These smaller numbers underneath are saying, yeah, everything's going good, you're connecting quickly, you're downloading quickly, but it's taking a little longer to finish up downloading the additional content like the images and your ads and whatnot.
Okay. So in that case, if I were having these issues, it has nothing to do with my server. I should not be looking for a new server at this time, another hosting company, because to and from my host is great. it's my images or my ads. It's on my end.
Not unless you have something else to really make up your mind that it's something that's negatively affecting you from your server. From what you've described, I don't see anything that could be overtly wrong with your server, like you're having really slow page load times because there's too many people, too many websites on that server. It seems to be, yes, something more on your end.
So is that, so if I go to my hosting and I say, look, it's taking forever, I'm actually starting getting complaints from people because my site can't load, or it does this partial load thing, but I come to my analytics and I actually see these times are higher, 3, 4, 5 seconds, I don't know, I mean, and that would be something to go to that provider and say, this is subpar, this isn't good anymore. I give me my options to do better. Is that when I go to them and say, fix it?
Yeah, you can go to them and say, these numbers are not good. They're going to say, this is likely too much, you have too much traffic, or someone else has too much traffic, and they'll try to upgrade your plan or get you some more server resources or something like that. But yes, if those numbers are very high, for example, your server response time or your connection time, then you can go to them with that information and say, look, this is more than it should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know that in the past 3 years that we've been doing the conference, that's always coming up in discussions of my site is slow and I got just a really bad customer service. They're blaming everything on me. They're telling me that it's on my end, that it's my site, that it's my, like, so this is good information for them to say, no, it's not me. I have resized my photos. All my photos are sized. I do the caching. I really believe it's on your end, and help me, I guess. I mean, it's a little more ammunition in your pocket.
Mm-hmm. It's difficult because the problem wouldn't be there if you weren't there. It's your fault in the sense that by virtue of you having that site, that issue is occurring. It's also your site is taking up server resources, but if your traffic is staying the same and you're having all these ups and downs in terms of downtime and page loads, that's someone else that's affecting you.
Okay.
It's only when your traffic is doing lots of crazy things, it's going up really high, and that's causing problems, then that they can say, that's your fault. But they're going to say that because they can, and they'll get away with it.
Well, okay, yes, and that's what it sounds like a lot of our members have gone through themselves, is sitting on the phone and just poor customer service. Like, they feel like they don't know enough to have a valid argument other than you're wrong. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, I don't know enough if I had to have a conversation like this with my hosting provider. At what point does somebody contact you or somebody else in your field, and what sort of rates would somebody like this provide if I needed help doing this? If they're really telling me it's your site, you really need to do this, how would I go about finding somebody who can help me with it?
That's a very difficult one. It's okay. A lot of times people will look for a local provider. They'll look for someone who kind of maybe, especially in a case like yours, would focus on smaller businesses. You can go to design agencies or big firms that do this, and they'll charge you $500 an hour, and they'll take as long as they want to do it. Or you can find someone who's going to charge you $25 or $30 an hour. So it's really hard to find exactly what you're looking for and the price you're looking for. In terms of resources, it's never a bad idea to post a sort of wanted type ad on. There's a lot of sites like Freelancer or Odesk that are going to be, you post a job and people can bid on it.
Is Odesk trustworthy? I've heard a lot of people suggest Odesk.
I have heard a lot of positive feedback of Odesk. I've never sat down and used it myself. I haven't used any of those sites, but I've heard a lot of really good things about especially for people who are posting jobs. It's fiercely competitive for people responding, but for people posting jobs, yeah, I've heard a lot of good things.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Ladies, any other questions? Lisa or Nancy?
Nope.
Nope. All right. Well, thank you so much, Cameron. We really appreciate you being here with us this evening. I have a feeling that there are going to be a lot of follow-up questions over the course of the week as people watch the video. And yeah, this is a new subject again for me. So it's very good information. I'm not very comfortable reading my analytics, so this was a good introductory for me anyway to get a better understanding of what's going on. So if anybody has questions, please tag Cameron. I have him tagged in the Hangout here, so you can tag him and ask him a question. Cameron will be watching for comments coming through. And don't forget to have the discussion in the Facebook events tab for site speed optimization. We'll kind of try and keep our conversation in one area. All right. Thank you so much again, Cameron. We really appreciate having you on.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
See you later.